everyone. Thank you all for coming to What Matters to Me and Why. I'm Annie, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for SAA, the Student Alumni Association. SAA is an on-campus organization that works to connect students with alumni. Our next upcoming event is actually on November 17th, Dinners with Anteaters. It's a great opportunity for students to network, develop professional skills on a very personal level. And if you have any questions about SAA, please feel free to reach out to any of our members wearing an SAA shirt. And now I'm gonna please welcome April Hall from the Alumni Association.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, everyone. My name is April Hull. I'm part of the Alumni Association team here. And shout out, by the way, to Annie and the Student Alumni Association for organizing this awesome event. As Annie mentioned, we are hosting our one of our biggest student events in a couple weeks. It's called Dinners with Anteaters. And as she said, it's a great opportunity for students and alumni to connect in a very casual environment. And it's kind of a night of just food, great food, mentorship, and networking. So if you're interested in participating in that event, stop by the Student Alumni Association table. If you're an alum or staff or faculty, you can host students. If you're a student, you can just expand your Anteater network and just attend the dinner for free. So that's a great opportunity for you to connect with alumni and students. And if you're not into networking in person like that, we do have a really cool alternative to it. It's actually called the Anteater Network. And what that is an online mentorship platform. It's going to be launched in February, and it's kind of like shopping. So you go onto this website and you find all these really cool alumni, and you can click connect, or you can click schedule a meeting, or you can send them a message. And so, you know, we know our students and we know our alumni, and you know, our alumni are super busy, and also our students sometimes have some challenges with networking and whatnot. So this is our way of helping our students connect with alumni. So that's called the Anteater Network. And as I mentioned, that's going to be launched in February. So if you have any questions, please find me, but you will definitely be hearing about it very, very soon. And without further ado, let's transition to the program. First off, I'm going to introduce Dean Ramin Talash, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Life and Leadership. He will be moderating our talk today. And then also, let's get a round of applause for him. And then also our very special guest speaker, Niaz Kasravi. Make sure you turn on your mics. Yeah.
All right, well, welcome this evening. I know this is always a special program to be a part of. Started years ago, where we had the opportunity to kind of mimic the What Matters to Me and Why series. I do want to take a moment to explain what the What Matters to Me and Why series is. It's actually a series that's offered on campus. It's a noontime series, and it was originally built to bring around faculty or staff on campus to talk about their experiences and what matters to them and why, right? And so we've run the series for a number of years. It's a very popular series. You get a free lunch out of it. So you students, if you ever see those emails come through for the What Matters to Me and Why series, and you see a speaker you'd like to see, sign up and register and go to the event. And you can get fed as well. Beyond that, a few years back, we decided, hey, you know, we have a lot of great alumni, and they're doing amazing things around the world, and why don't we do an evening time alumni series to have more students attend, right? And certainly this is open to faculty and staff, and I see faculty and staff in the room, which is great. But we also wanted to really kind of expand it out to have more students as well. So that's why we originated that program, and then we've had the series continue since that day. So this is a continuation. This is our first one for this year, and then we will have 2 more later on during the year as well. So that's my promo. But really, now I get to talk to our speakers. So hopefully you've all read the bio on Dr. Kasravi and Niaz. I'll call her by first name today. But I think what we want to do is really, and hopefully you were really intrigued by that bio, but I think what we want to do is we want to dig a little deeper. And so we want to learn a little bit more about how she became who she is now, what were her values, what led her into this direction, and what were her UC Irvine experiences, so she can tell you a little bit about her bachelor's and later extended degrees beyond that, which I think have all been at UC Irvine. Yes. So she is truly an anteater all the way through. So why don't I stop talking and really start with the first question, and that is, Niaz, if you can share, you know, what is your story? What is your story? How did you come here? What was it that you chose, this major that you chose? Why did you fall into that major? And maybe you can share a little bit about your background in that way.
Hi everybody, I'm Niaz and I'm really excited to be here. It really is an honor to come back and speak with students, alumni, and faculty here at UC Irvine. What was the question? How did I come here?
Your background.
My background, why did I choose?
How you came to UCI, what major you chose. And
okay, so I'm an immigrant to this country. Moved here with my family in 1984 from Iran. And, I ended up at UC Irvine. I was applying to colleges like all of us do, and UC Irvine was one of the places that accepted me, and I came here as an undecided major. Right. And initially, I gave myself some time. As an immigrant, I think one of the things you realize in this country is you have an opportunity to really learn what you want to do. What are your interests? What is your passion? What's your calling? And I think these are some of the reasons our parents bring us here. In Iran, the way that it works, I think it still works this way, is you take an exam, an entrance exam into a college, and you get accepted into specific fields. You don't particularly have an option. And here I had all these options, and I wasn't really sure, medical school, law school, engineering, the three careers that Iranians know most and go to most probably, weren't particularly calling me, so I took couple of years to decide, and I started to take psychology classes, and I fell in love with the study of the human psyche, and so I decided to become a psychology major. And I was trying to sign up for courses and take all these classes that sounded interesting, but they were all full because seniors and juniors got priority. And so I was like, I need units, what am I gonna do? And I'd taken an intro to criminology course, and I thought it was really interesting, something that I'd never really thought about and really studied. And so I said, when else am I gonna have in life an opportunity to get to learn about something because it interests me? And from there, that's when it all started, when I learned about our system of justice. And if you are from the CLS department, you know that there are different ways of approaching the study of the criminal justice system. For me, it was very much about the sociology of law and inequality, and that's what really spoke to me, is when I had a professor, and you'll hear about her tonight a lot. Her name was Dr. Kitty Calavita. She was my professor when I was an undergrad. She was my advisor when I was in grad school. She now sits on the board of directors for my institute. So a long time and lifelong friend and mentor. And she really opened my eyes about the criminal justice system in America. And I learned that about all the inequalities that exist within it, the systemic and institutional racism and oppression, the way that it discriminates against the poor, people of color, mentally ill, the way that it criminalizes drug addiction. And I think as an immigrant, learning about how broken this system was and how unfair it was really, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe that this country that we'd come to, and we'd escaped an oppressive sort of environment and a war and a revolution, and we'd come to the US and sort of believed in the branding that we put out in the world, right? And that's not to say that I haven't had amazing opportunities in this country. I have, and I'm so grateful for it. And I'm grateful for the fact that I get to speak up about what I think is not fair and not get penalized for it, not get, for the most part, I think there are some people who are now getting death threats for being advocates. But, so as an immigrant, I expected something different. And so that's why the study of our justice system really spoke to me. But I think something that Dr. Calavita taught and I learned through just my studies and my work later is that, while back in my home country, trying to change the system might have legally gotten me imprisoned and killed, you know, in America, it's actually possible. And I think it's required, right? I mean, that's how we've made all the progress that we've made through the years, is by people standing up and saying, this is not right, this is not fair, and putting themselves on the line to really make it. So I think that's what this country requires. And so when I started to get deeper and deeper into the study of the justice system, I just knew that it was my calling.
Can you describe for folks what you've done professionally after you left UC Irvine, so that they get a sense of what you do right now?
Yeah, sure. You want me to go through the kind of trajectory? You want
Sure.
me to start at the present? So I finished my undergrad, and I had the choice of going to law school or grad school. And I think for like a week, I thought I might go to law school. But I soon discovered that's just not who I am. That's not how I think. I'm very much, I need to study the legal system, not just the law in the books, but I need to look at the sociology of the law, like the law in action and who it benefits and who it hurts. So I knew I had to go into grad school, because that's what would afford me the opportunity to learn more in the way that I wanted to. And so I went to grad school, and I had amazing peers and amazing advisors. You know, got the opportunity to graduate from one of the top criminal justice departments in the country, right? And so after grad school, I really had an itch to, maybe it's because I was inside an academic institution for 10 years, you know, I really had an itch to do hands-on, boots-on-the-ground work on human rights issues and working with communities and movement building and things like that. Many academic, although I surrounded myself with folks who believed and pushed me to do what I wanted to do. But I think often academic institutions and PhD programs, for the most part, prepare you for academia. I think now we've gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
At UCI, at other places, there's clinics at different schools that actually prepare you for that. But back then, it was really difficult. I hadn't had the internships that people usually have when they want to get into the advocacy space. No one really knew who I was. I had to kind of pay my dues. So I really had to bang on the door of nonprofits and human rights organizations and be denied so many times an entry-level position, even though I had a PhD, because I just didn't have the network and the connections and the in, you know. And so but I didn't give up. I mean, I remember receiving one rejection letter in the mail, and I sat on my parents' porch and I just started crying, thinking no one's ever gonna hire me. So I banged on many, many, many doors, and I finally landed a relatively poor-paying job at Amnesty International USA, helping build their domestic human rights program and doing work around policing and criminal justice and civil rights issues pre and post 9/11. So that's where it started. Mm-hmm. And you know, here we are, 17 some years later. It's unbelievable. I know I sound like all of your parents when I say it's unbelievable how fast time flies. But man, I was just there, you know, yesterday listening to folks talking about this stuff. So yeah, one thing led to another, and I started down working in the area of human rights, particularly focusing on domestic human rights, particularly focusing on the criminal justice system, and specifically policing issues for a long time. And I have also, we can get into this later, for my dissertation, I did also go to Iran and study the reform movement in that country. So I have also worked a bit on human rights issues and women's rights issues in Iran, but mostly my work has been centered on criminal justice issues. And I ended up at the NAACP doing policing work, and then when I left there, I was running their criminal justice program and doing work around death penalty, reentry, drug law reforms, and policing. And about 3 years ago, I'd done a lot of things that I had wanted to do while I was at the NAACP, and home was calling, my family was here. And I could have stayed I was in DC at that point for 7, 8 years. And I could have stayed there, but I really wanted to be closer to family. Nothing but career was holding me back in DC. And I kind of looked down the line, thinking 10, 20, 30 years down the line, if my parents are old and once they're gone, I will have missed these years with them, you know? So I came back, and for the last couple of years, I've been running a research and advocacy institute that focuses on criminal justice, social justice, and racial justice issues. And basically, we work with nonprofits and foundations as issue experts, and we connect, for example, foundations to movements and advocacy groups on the ground doing this work around criminal justice issues. My goal, and I work with students, you know, I think some people think, there's many ways to do it. People think when you start your own institute or consulting firm or company, you have to have this huge, and sometimes that's the way it is, but sometimes you just do it one foot in front of the other. And so got a couple of contracts and said, I want to bring these contracts under an institute so I can reach out to students to help me with the research. Because I think if I was in grad school or undergrad, I would have loved the opportunity to have my work and research not only meet the requirements for my courses, but also really be tied to what's happening in communities, particularly around justice issues. So that's what I do now.
So, pretty amazing leader. Now, when you were a UCI student, did you see yourself as a leader at that time?
No, I don't think I ever, you know, I think there's people who have ambition and vision to be leaders, and I think that's great. I think for me it was something, and thank you for calling me that, and thank you for thinking that. I think it's something I honed, a skill that I honed over the years, and not because I was deliberately trying to become, because I was doing what I thought was my calling, and I really wanted to do an excellent job, you know, and maybe it's the Virgo in me, maybe it's because I'm a woman. I read that, like, when women apply for positions, they look at the qualifications and they feel like they have to meet every single one of those things before they put their name in the hat or apply for a job. And for men, it's different. If they meet like 1/3 of those qualifications, hey, why not, right? So maybe it's because, but I really just worked at it. And so when I started UC Irvine, I was pretty much nerdy, and I still have a very nerdy side. Maybe you look at me and you think I'm a complete nerd, which is totally fine. I was quiet, and I wanted to stick to my studies. When we moved to the States, our immigration experience entailed moving around a lot. So I went to 3 high schools, for many reasons, which I can explain later. Went to 3 high schools, you know, we weren't supposed to say, we were gonna go back, things didn't work out. So when I got to UC Irvine, I was like, I'm gonna stay here, I'm gonna focus on my studies, I'm just gonna stay put and figure out what I'm doing with my life. So I was really just in that. And I was either, I think it was the end of my freshman year, when a senior, her name was Mercedes, she reached out to me. She was involved in the Iranian Cultural Club. Back then it was called the ICC. I think it's now called ISU, if I'm not wrong. And I see some of our students here tonight. She reached out to me and she wanted me to get involved with the cultural club. And I said, okay, you know, I took on a small role for, I think, a award ceremony that they were having. But that's really where I blossomed, and I ended up, I think my junior or senior year, becoming the president of ICC, and we did amazing events that brought not only students to campus, but the community in Southern California, which was, I think, a little bit smaller then than it is now, but still, I think, relatively large. But we would draw hundreds of community members to our cultural events, and we had Farsi classes, and we did work with other clubs and organizations. And I think one of the places where I kind of honed my leadership skills was because someone reached out to me and pulled me out of my shell and said, here, do this. you know, and was there to support me. And so I think, you know, having expertise and knowledge in a particular issue, of course, is part of being a leader, but I think there are skills that you need to learn as well to really kind of be effective. So,
yeah. Actually, I mean, that's something that we talk about a lot here on campus. I mean, I like to say I'm always talking about the fact that students have leadership, that if they've gotten here, they can always grow their leadership and expand their leadership. So it's a concept that I think we see it over and over again. Students sometimes don't see themselves as leaders, but they become leaders, and they work at it. You talked about another thing that we talk about a lot here on campus, that's mentorship, and the mentorship relationship that you developed with your professor, Kitty Calavita. I'm kind of curious, when you were in it, did you know you were being mentored? Did you have to work at that, creating that relationship? What kinds of things did you do to create a relationship like that with a faculty member? Because I'm sure some of our students would like to, when they end their time here at UCI, have some type of relationship with faculty that maybe not exactly the same, but close to what you have.
Yeah, I think when I was an undergrad, let me back up. I think we have many different mentors in our lives at the same time and throughout the course of our life. And they play different roles and they guide you in different ways. I've never really, and I have many mentors in my life, but I've never really called them mentors or I'm your mentee. It's something I realize along the way that who I am has a lot to do with the influence of this person in my life. So I'm surrounded by those types of people. I think with Dr. Calavita, with Kitty, it was different because she was my grad school advisor, you know? And at first I thought, I think an advisor is one thing, but a mentor is something else. And I think once I got into my career and I started working and doing the things that I was doing, I really realized the profound impact she had on me. It went beyond being an advisor and helping me get through grad school and write my dissertation and defend it, and it went beyond that. I think that it started even when I was an undergrad because her classes, the way that she taught, took all your confusion and your fury and your anger about injustice and things you're confused about and helped you understand and channel it, you know. So when I was an undergrad, she was my professor. She wasn't an advisor. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons I stayed at UC Irvine is because I really wanted to work with her, you know. And I think in the beginning, you know, it's been a while. If memory is not failing me, I think in the beginning, I'm not sure she was immediately assigned to me as an advisor. And I actually ended up having co-advisors because I went and I sought her out. I said, I want to work with you. And she made room, and you know, I'm sure people have a certain capacity of how many students they can take on. And I think if there's one person who has a lot to do and everything to do with how I approach this work and why I'm in this space, it's Kitty Calavita. I think words can't express the profound impact that she has had on my life and continues to have on my life, you know? So I think it's important, you know, as a student, whatever field you want to get into, to look at who you admire and who it is that you really look up to, and whose values is something that you're striving towards, right? Or that jive well with you, and surround yourself with those people. So I think for me it was really life-changing.
Great. So maybe you can share what you describe as keys to your success, but I'm going to follow it up also with what were some of the difficulties you ran into along the way as well. So keys to success, but if you want to weave in also some of the difficulties you faced and how to overcome, that would be great too.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone is different in terms of keys to success. For me, I never was a planner. I have a friend who plans out her entire life, to the point of knowing what year she wants to have how many children so that they're old enough to go to Disney World in a specific year. So, and I am the complete opposite of that, you know. I was looking for a calling. You know, I think for me, especially as the years went by, I started to define success specifically and differently, and very much apart from what title do I have, what victories do I have under my belt, what are the reports I've published, and you know, what's my social media following, and what's my income. These things are, of course, cool things and important things, but I think success and happiness are completely separate from that. Those things can be a part of your journey to being successful and happy. But for me, success is, you know, going to bed every night and not having any qualms about, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, right? I have a very dear friend who was supposed to be here tonight, but he couldn't make it, who kind of verbalized it. And he said, you know, Niaz, when I look ahead, when I'm old and gray, I'm sitting on my porch, and this might be very cliche, and I look back at my life, and I have this beautiful house, and I have these amazing, you know, cars, and do I want to say that I had a lot of fun, you know, I bought a lot of nice things, and then what, right? I think for me, success is living your life in a way that when you're at that stage, you look back and you think, my life mattered. It really mattered that I was on this earth, beyond success for my personal self and for my family, which again, I think these are important things to achieve personal wealth and, you know, get that publication, get that, you know, tenure track position, become CEO, become partner, publish, you know, get a nice car. All these things are important, but life is not a checklist. And I think success in a career is not a checklist, because none of that you can take with you. But the legacy you leave around how you spent your time while you were here, that lasts forever.
Great.
Oh, difficulties?
So yeah, I'll transition then. Okay, so what were those moments that maybe you hit bumps in the road, and how did you persist and overcome those bumps?
You know, there's many bumps in the road. I think one of the things you learn as a student, particularly through a PhD program, but as a student in general, are the skills that you need to overcome those challenges and bumps in the road, you know? I think going through a PhD program was grueling, you know? It helped because I surrounded myself with people who understood why I was doing what I was doing. And I got through it, you know, and I was doing something that I really believed in. I was studying things that really interested me, not because I just wanted to get a degree, right? I think that helps. And I'll share with you tonight, this is something I've never really shared publicly. My close friends and family know this, but I think probably career-wise, the time where I hit the, in my mind, bottom was when I was let go from an organization that I helped launch, and I fully believed in. I fully believed in everyone who was in that organization. I gave up my career in the human rights space because I thought, this is my, I didn't give it up. I kind of transitioned from squarely doing human rights and civil rights and justice work to working at this organization because it provided me an opportunity to do those things for my own community, you know? And to me, what better calling, you know, what better use of my time than that? Long story short, that's not what that organization was interested in. At least not then. Now they've come around a bit, right? But they were not interested in doing human rights and racial justice and, anti-racism work. And I couldn't understand it. I was like, oh, don't you see what's happened to us? 9/11, 3 Muslim bans later, now we know we got to be in these spaces, But, so I was devastated. It was just a moment where I had to sit back and say, what am I going to do with my life? And again, I've never shared this. There was one day, I just didn't want to get out of bed. I was so upset. And a friend called me and we're talking and she convinced me to get up. It was a beautiful fall day. She's like, go for a drive on GW Parkway, which is this gorgeous road in the DC area. And so I did. And, there was never a gap in terms of my career right away, even before I was talking to a friend of mine who was at the NAACP who knew I'd done policing work, so brought me on as a consultant to head up all their police brutality cases and work with families and communities. So there was never like a big career gap, but emotionally and mentally and psychologically, it was so difficult to get over that. It took me a very long time to understand why that wasn't a fit and how am I going to be okay with that. But from that, they always say, after your biggest kind of downfalls, you have your best accomplishments and most major accomplishments, and that's really what it was. I had the opportunity to do things and learn things at the NAACP that have defined my career or some of the proudest moments in my life, So I couldn't see it back then that this most devastating thing that had me in bed not wanting to get out was actually something that led to where I am today and where I'm supposed to be.
Wow, that's great. So you're doing amazing work and social justice work and advocacy work. And I think it would be void to not talk about something that's like happening in the news. And so, there's a lot of stuff going on with extremism. And right here, even in Orange County, you've been working on a case that, as a fellow Iranian American, I think hits a little bit home. And I thought maybe we could open the door to that case and let's say your advocacy and as an example of your advocacy. So I'm setting the table, I think, for something, but I'll let you take it from there.
I've been working with the Mazroi family. Their son, they are Orange County residents, their son, Shayan, was 22, and he was playing pool at a pub in Laguna Niguel, and he was confronted by 2 people, one of whom is a known white supremacist, and the other was his girlfriend, and they attacked him verbally. She specifically attacked him and spat at him and asked him where he's from, and called him all sorts of names and racial slurs, and the incident escalates and ends up in Shayan being stabbed by the white supremacist boyfriend, and he dies of his wounds later in the hospital. And so there are 2 cases actually I'm working on, and the other case is the case of Bijan Qaisar, who is a young Iranian man who was shot 9 times off of the GW Parkway, actually, by park police officers. He was unarmed, he was in his car, and a year later, and the family still has no answers, But, I think this is, as a humanitarian and a human rights advocate, I think it's a nightmare when this happens to anyone. As an Iranian American, it was a complete nightmare to realize that what I was afraid of has hit home. And so I've been working with the family, and you can read the case. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it. It's 3 years old, and the murderer is awaiting trial to begin in January. We had to do a lot of advocacy to get the community engaged, and it's still tough. I think people don't think that this can happen to them. People think that I came to this country, particularly as immigrants, you know, sometimes some immigrant communities have a tendency to get trapped into this idea of, sometimes even subconsciously, good versus bad immigrant, you know? We did everything we were supposed to do. We studied, we became lawyers, and we have all this wealth, and we're educators, and we contribute. And they think that that's going to protect them from some of the ugly undertones, things that are coming to the surface that have been a part of this country throughout its history. So I think, you know, hate is hate. I think that you never think it's going to happen to you, regardless of what community you come from, even if you see it happen to other people. Particularly some communities, just it's outside of the realm of the possibility of things ever happening to them until it does. You know, and you know, all that it takes is for someone to think you're something, especially these days. I think people are a lot freer with their hatred and racism and discrimination. And so it doesn't even have to be true. Someone has to just not like or hate something that they think you are. And then you're the target. So I think it's on all of us to really recognize that and get involved, not just because it's the right thing to do, because it absolutely is the right thing to do, you know, but it could really be any of us.
I think what I want to do is shift gears a little to more about, you know, what's your advice for current students? If you had to, you know, be the wise person sitting here who's really gotten involved in the community, doing amazing advocacy work, and really showing your anteater pride. But what advice would you give to students that are here today, for instance, that you would like to give?
I think I've woven some of it through some of my earlier remarks. I think especially, it's always a good time to do this, but especially when you're a student and or you're starting out in your career, to really think about and define what success means to you. And I encourage you to completely separate that definition. Maybe have 2 columns. If you want to get real nerdy about it, have 2 columns of what material success means, right? But I don't think that's all of success. Really think about and be deliberate about what success looks like to you regardless of all the material things in life. I think we're always in a hurry to finish and get to the next phase, you know. I think one thing that I am so glad that I did, and perhaps it was because all the psych courses were full and I couldn't get in, right? But I got the opportunity, I allowed myself the time to really explore my passion while I was in a university setting. And there were all these amazing things that I could learn about. And so rather than having this life plan, and it's fine if you're a planner for your life, I think that can be a strength, just depends on your personality. But really take time to explore the opportunities that are available to you here, because once you get out into the real world, you know, there's going to be other opportunities, but this amazing space where you get to just explore and learn who you are, you know, it gets solidified as you get older. But right now, you really have time, and you have to give yourself this space to explore who you are and experiment. Some things may not work out, you know, and better to learn now than 10 years down the road, you know. So that's some of the things I would tell students, and I think surrounding yourselves with people, you can call them mentors, advisors, even friends, you know, who share your values and who you really know that you can learn from is really important.
All right. I think at this point, I have more questions, but I think you have given us enough material that we can broaden out and ask our audience members if they have questions for Niaz that they would like to share. So, and I don't know, I think April, you have a mic? Okay, great. So if you have any questions that you're curious about.
Hi, thanks for joining us and sharing your story. It was very inspiring. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about, given the type of work you do, how you stay optimistic, and especially maybe now and what's going on in the country and abroad, and also with like the rate of progress and how you remind yourself of the victories you're achieving and so forth.
That's a good question. I think it's tough sometimes. It's easy to say, people are awful, look at everything that's going on, and look at these big issues that seem insurmountable, right? Well, we created a lot of these issues. I was listening, you know, I'm not a scientist, I'm a social scientist. I don't, you know, the natural sciences, you know, but I was listening when I was driving down here in 2-hour traffic from LA, that you know, and these scientists over and over are telling us that, you know, climate change is you know, we can reverse it, you know, and it's amazing to me that some of the things that seem so big that we can't, it's within our power to do it. You know, I think some of it is innate. There's people who might be more pessimistic, glass half full, glass half empty. But if you give up, then what? Right? I don't know what I would do with my life if I gave up. I was raised with a specific belief that human beings have the opportunity to choose good over bad, to use their own mind, which means we have the opportunity to become better and make progress. So I don't think I ever believed that human beings are bad innately. That helps a lot, you know? I think in the last few years particularly, I've had to shut down, sometimes shut off social media, sometimes not read everything that comes across my phone, because it's a distraction. Yes, we're seeing more incidents, perhaps of hate crimes, right? We're witnessing more incidents of police brutality, although that's because they're being captured on camera. So even though things look like they have changed a lot, we just know about them. They're being broadcast more to some extent. There are some things that have gotten worse, you know? But I think it helps to recognize that we didn't get here overnight. We're not gonna solve it overnight, but that it's doable because we created this problem. And so those are some of the ways I deal with it. I think I'm not sure I would say I'm an optimist, but I'm not a pessimist. I think there were times along the journey, I was working for a short while with people who had been sexually abused inside of prisons. And I was much younger. And it took a toll. You know, I'd gone through some stuff in my career in terms of being at positions where, you know, I thought I wasn't being treated right at organizations and whatnot. And then I get into this work and I hit a wall. And I quit. I was, you know, early 30s. I quit and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm taking a break. I'm gonna go become a personal trainer. And my dad he was like, what? What are you gonna do? And I was bored within 3 months. I was looking for work and I went back. But I allowed myself, it was great, you know, it's a healthy thing to do, but I was so bored at the gym for like 8 hours a day. But I gave myself the time to just take a break, you know? And I think even at the NAACP, there was a lot of burnout. You know, we had 2,200 chapters across the country that we worked with, cases of police brutality and injustice at every single one of them. We work with volunteers, so we worked all hours of the night and weekend, and there was the burnout was real, you know. So I think I got a lot more conscious about finding some outlets, whether it's yoga or meditation. So it's a lot of some of that too. But I think you have to work at it. And you have to kind of go internal to figure out what's going to keep you from going to the dark place where you just throw your hands up and give up.
All right, another question.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Just wanted to ask regarding your first job or first role out of college with Amnesty International, such a big organization. What were some of the Keystone experiences there and things you witnessed about the leadership and superiors there that help you sort of understand what is my calling or where can I innovate in this field and add to it and contribute, per se?
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of lessons learned, I think, at the NAACP and throughout the years. I think that you learn that every nonprofit and every humanitarian advocacy organization has its own internal issues and internal politics that you have to deal with. And sometimes you may not expect that of those spaces, right? So you see the internal politics, you see some things internally that you might not agree with or think is unfair. And you say, how could this happen in an organization that fights for human rights on every single day? And how do they treat this person this way? And why does this internal process look so unfair, right? So I think there's work to do internally, and I'm not just talking about the NAACP. I think that's just my first exposure, you know. But one of the greatest things I learned at the NAACP is, even before I got there, so I was telling you that I had a hard time breaking into the advocacy and human rights space, right? I didn't know anyone. I talked to so many people, and I went out there and met with the new head of the domestic human rights program for Amnesty International USA. His second week on the job, I reached out to him, and he said, I'm new, I'm just creating this, what do you want? I said, I want to work for you. He's like, I don't have money. I said, well, I'm going to be in DC, and I wasn't. I just said that because I knew I would go just to meet with him. So you have to put yourself out there and do this kind of legwork and connect with folks. It's beyond networking. When people say networking, I feel like schmoozing and drinking wine. It's not that. It's really connecting with folks, you know. So I took a trip out there. My mom came with me. She hung out in DC. I went over and he asked me the same question. What do you want? And I said, this is the kind of work I want to do. And he said, that's great. I'm going to keep you in mind, but I really don't have a budget right now beyond anyone, maybe for me and maybe for a part-time assistant. I said, okay, it's good to meet you. And he said, do you have an hour or two? I have all these letters that people have sent me from, I think it was women, from inside prisons that he needed to go through and categorize. Can you help me? I said, okay. So we sat down, we went through those letters, I went off. Come back, 9/11 happens. And the government implements the NCERS program where they're asking people from majority Muslim countries, men of a certain age, to come in and register. And I had a friend who was an attorney. Long story short, she's like, we need help. These people don't know what the heck they're doing. Come and help us. I went to the INS. It was chaos. Lines of Middle Eastern and Muslim men waiting, coming to, say, register me. No one knew how to process these applications. They couldn't get through everyone. They put them in detention at the end of the night. They sent some of them to Arizona for no other reason that they'd shown up to register, right? So I hit up my contact at the NAACP and I said, do you know this is happening? And he said, you know what, can you write a memo about it? And I said, okay. So I wrote a memo about it. 2 days later, his boss asks him, what are you doing about this? And he says, oh, I have a PhD researcher who is who is in the middle of it, and she's going to write us this right. And so They were able to get some more money and give me like $30,000 a year, and I moved to DC for that position. But I say this often to people when they ask, especially when you're starting out, you just have to put yourself out there. Sometimes you have to volunteer and do things that you think are right for people to recognize your value. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, good afternoon, or good evening, I'm sorry. I have a bit of a two-part question. My first one is, what are some of the skill sets that you took away from academia and movement building that are maybe like concrete examples that you really saw where they meet? Mm-hmm. So that's one question. And my second question to you is, where do you see police reform going? Where do you see us making an impact and a difference in that, in reforming, right? Because there's a lot of, like you said, multiple issues going on across the country, but where are we headed to, and what does that look like?
So first part about what skills I took away from maybe academia that helped with my work around movement building and advocacy. I think I came away from academia with a lot of knowledge around research and data and things that movements and communities don't often have access to. This is one reason I left academia, because I felt that it was, at that point, and I think there are still pockets of it that are still very disconnected, from the communities and the issues that we really study, particularly around justice issues, right? The data and the work and the experts weren't always connected to the community and providing that data to help the campaigns that are aiming to correct those injustices. So at every point in every organization that I've been working, a great skill has been the ability to bring that research, that analysis, and that data and be able to insert it into a campaign in a way that's useful and palatable and comprehensible to the lay population, right? So it's really an amazing tool if used properly to make change, right? I think there's probably all these theoretical discussions about keeping academia completely separate from the policy space, but I think there's a case to be made for the opposite, because I think we can make a lot of change. What was your second? Oh, policing. It is easier to abolish the death penalty than it is to reform policing in America. It is by far the most difficult issue I've ever worked on, and I'm still working on it. I think we've made a little bit of progress, and I say very little, because to me, you've done something completely wrong forever, and now you want to try to do a little good, and people think you've won. We've seen some convictions of police officers who have killed unarmed individuals over the last few years, which has been rarer than it is now, but it's still not the norm, and it's quite rare. I'm involved in some efforts that are working with two things: centering the voices of families who have lost people to police violence and working with them to be the voice for change and providing the information and resources that they need to advocate for change. I am a strong believer that the people who are going to lead any movement and lead out of any social ill are going to have to be the people who are most impacted by that movement. So I think that is a promising strategy, and it's been explored to some extent, but I think it really needs a serious strategy, and we're working on that. I think the work around how you prosecute, who investigates and who prosecutes police officers, hasn't been explored. There's independent, monitors and independent prosecutors, but what does it look like perhaps to have a federal prosecutor? I don't think the federal government wants this job, So I think we're making progress, but the thing with policing is that it is so hyper-local that you have to provide resources for local advocates who are working on this issue. Because every community has different issues, different dynamics, different ways that the officers are hired, police chiefs are hired or appointed, different policies. And so I think the work needs to include some national stuff in terms of setting national standards, but really also supporting local advocacy. I think people are, even funders are, for the most part, there are some funders that are courageous and have really stepped up, but they distance themselves from policing. It is a long-term battle, and it's tough. So I think it's one of the answers is to keep it squarely at the center of a lot of the work we do around justice reform.
Take a couple more questions.
Good evening. I was wondering if you could share with us something that was a deeply held belief when you were an undergrad that you no longer hold as deeply, having lived in the world and experienced the world as a professional.
That's a good question and a tough question. I'm trying to decide whether I want to be pessimistic or optimistic. I think, okay, I got my answer. I discovered that not everyone in the advocacy and reform movement has to agree with me. For example, over the last few years, there has been, criminal justice reform became dinner table conversation, at least under the last administration, and now we're kind of turning the clock back. But a lot of the new players and the new partners around the table were fiscal conservatives. And I saw that many allies and advocates and friends that I'd worked with throughout the years, and that's a strategy, right? I mean, they might really believe in that, and that's fine. I just don't see credibility in that in the long run. And that is, they kind of gave up the fight for doing anti-racist work, for doing police accountability work, all the stuff that perhaps rubs these new fiscal conservative, mostly wealthy partners the wrong way. A lot of the newcomers, and more power to them, we need help on every front. But they saw how much money we were wasting in the criminal justice system and how it just wasn't, producing the results that it should. And so they were looking at it, how do we cut back costs? How do we improve reentry? How do we, shrink the system? But they weren't really looking at what is the foundational systemic issues of injustice within the system, right? How can we help people enter society more, right? And more successfully. And so I saw those folks, at least publicly, give up the fight for those harder things because it would rub the allies, the new allies, who had some probably initially just fiscal interest and perhaps some moral interest as a secondary thing. So they gave up that fight, which was at the heart of the problems that we're dealing with. And that's something I didn't expect. I think I was a lot more idealistic about the advocacy space. But I learned to be okay with it. I learned that they may call me a purist, which is not true. I think reform is necessary, and a strategic reform is the best way to move forward, right? But I learned that that I don't, it was tough to learn that some people that I fully and truly respected were able to kind of give up the fundamental issues to make those easy wins. And it's something I didn't really think about or expect when I was much younger. You kind of learn the nuances, and you learn through your disappointment who you really are, I think, and what you don't want to do and what you do want to do.
All right. I think with that, we learned about leadership. We talked about mentoring. We talked about having passion, being an advocate, and defining success for yourself. And so with that, I would like to give a round of applause to Niaz for sharing her story with us. Truly amazing work that you're doing, and we're very proud of you as an anteater, and as an anteater, and as an anteater. 3 times through, undergrad, master's, PhD. So with that, I don't know, April, what do you want me to talk about now? Oh, time for dinner.
For dinner?
That's right. So thank you for being patient. Hopefully, Niaz is going to be here a little bit longer, so if you want to come up and talk to her, but also there's food waiting. And part of this program is also to enjoy company and meet new people. So I want to encourage people to have conversations as they grab food and meet the people around you at their table and enjoy the camaraderie here at UCI. And so thank you again for joining us here this evening.